Good afternoon. Welcome to the Louisiana Federation for Children live webinar. Today's topic are micro schools in Louisiana's future. You will be able to submit your questions in the YouTube and Facebook comment boxes. Let's welcome our host today, AFC's Louisiana Grassroots Coordinator, Tiffany Crawford.
Good afternoon. I'm so excited to be here with our panelists today. And today on the panel, we have Ms. Kelli Bottger, the Regional Government Affairs Director for AFC, who is a former educator and has spent her professional career providing equitable education opportunities for families. We have Dr. Cade Brumley, our new Louisiana State Superintendent. Dr. Brumley has previously served as the superintendent to both Jefferson and DeSoto parishes and has taught on the university level. And we have Ms. Ashley Redd, who is an educator and the head of schools for NOLA Micro Schools. So welcome, panelists. It's truly an honor to be able to guide this discussion today. And of course, we'll be talking about micro schools and our micro schools in Louisiana's future. The pandemic has sparked the need for creativity, for flexibility, for regrouping and doing some new things. And so as we continue to work to try and make sure our families are receiving the best educational opportunities, a growing alternative to virtual and traditional education are micro schools. And micro schools we know have been around long before COVID-19. So let's jump right into it and start talking about micro schools. And is this a more viable option in the midst of this pandemic? So I'll start with you, Ms. Redd. Today about what are micro schools and how is it different from homeschooling? How do micro schools work?
Yeah, absolutely. So micro schools are essentially a return to a one-room schoolhouse model of education, but reimagined for the needs of modern day students. And so they're very small, usually no more than 15 to 25 students would be in a single pod. And there's a variety of ages. So for example, at NOLA Micro, our youngest learner is in 3rd grade and our oldest is in 11th grade. And they all work together in a shared space. And yeah, in terms of how it differs from homeschooling, there are some definite similarities. So I would say similarities would be that students are really working at their own pace, and they are not feeling pressured to perform at a certain level based on their age or their grade level, and instead they're able to move through skills as they're ready to do so, and in most cases end up mastering content that is above their grade level in a traditional school. And that's a little bit similar to homeschools. Where they differ is really in the opportunity for developing a strong sense of community. And we kind of define community as the key to creating a supportive school experience for our learners where relationships and accountability are valued over rules and consequences. And so we believe that intentional community building is what really enables a collective and empowers our students to create change. And so there are some similarities, but I think that would be the biggest defining difference is that sense of community and the opportunities they have access to as a part of that community.
And over this period, we've heard a lot of different terminology. We've heard micro schooling, we've heard learning pods, we've even heard, I've heard the term pandemic pods. Are these different names for the same thing, or are these things different?
I would say that those are different in terms of for example, NOLA Micro Schools, we've been around for, this is our 6th year of operation. When I hear the term pandemic pod, that makes me think of something that has come up as a result of the pandemic and really in response to this, new normal that we're experiencing and trying to navigate. In terms of micro schooling, I think there is an intentionality in creating those communities that I feel like the pandemic in some ways has opened people's minds to what other possibilities are there for education instead of just a traditional model. And so whether you're calling it a pandemic pod or a micro school or whatever you may call it, I think it is this sense of searching for something that is different and something that is not the norm that we've seen in the past.
So, Dr. Brumley, do you envision micro schools becoming more expansive in Louisiana?
Well, let me start off by just saying I get asked the question frequently, if and when we come out of this pandemic, what things do I hope will remain that happened during this period of time? And I do think it's a time of innovation. I think we're seeing some of that, but really for me, the one thing that I'm very well on record in saying is that I think that, and I hope that this will lead to further advancement of both educational flexibility and further empowerment for parents to make decisions on their own kids' education in whatever format that might look like. So I think that those are two really important things that I hope will come from this most unfortunate situation. To your question specifically, do I think that we will see more micro schools or pods? Yes, I do, and I hope so. I hope so long as we can determine a way to make sure that those are safe environments for kids, to ensure that there's environments where we feel confident that kids can get the education that they need and deserve, that's grade level appropriate. And we know that for many families and many kids, this might be the best option for them. And so certainly looking forward to further exploring this idea, having further conversations around this, and looking at what policy decisions might need to be made around this and how I can support those initiatives.
And that's great to know, because we are definitely in a time where creativity and flexibility has to kind of stand tall. In your opinion, Dr. Brumley, is there a distinction between micro schools and homeschoolings, or how do they match up to you?
Yeah, again, there are a lot of questions that we just don't know the answer to right now across the board. I think that whenever I think of homeschooling, I think more of individual parents working with their own personal children. However, with micro schools, I don't think that that's necessarily the case. And I think there's an opportunity here even to bring in a level of talent into the micro school or to the pod, instructional talent that gives parents additional choice. So for instance, there might be an opportunity for a group of parents to work together and determine, who could be the best and most talented teacher for their kids, and what might they be able to do to secure that teacher for their micro school. And so I don't necessarily, and maybe this thinking is completely wrong, and I'll certainly say that it is if you tell me so and you can prove it. But I think that there is a difference, and I think that there is an opportunity to ensure that parents do have additional flexibilities and opportunities through this, but we can also ensure a high standard for safety and educational outcomes.
Does Louisiana currently have, that of, Dr. Brumley, is there any guidance relative to micro schools? Can anyone start a micro school right now?
Yeah, we do not necessarily have specific guidance on micro schools. And I think it's an important question, Tiffany, because if it is true that we will have additional micro schools or that we will have additional pods, I think it's important that we get that right at the onset. And conversations with individuals like Ashley and Kelli are going to be really important, as well as parents who've experienced this before and students. So as though if there is a need for some form of policy or rulemaking on our end, that we're doing that in the appropriate way.
So, Ms. Red, Let's talk about how do micro schools follow, what kind of curriculum? Do they follow a traditional curriculum standard? Like what are the pedagogical methods and things like that with micro schooling?
Yeah. So first I'll say we do hold our students to the same standards that they would be held to at a traditional public school. I think that the difference is just kind of how we get there. So we do use a lot of online platforms in terms of, I suppose that would be our supplement for the direct instruction. So a lot of parents, I think, have started to experience this as we've gone to virtual, sort of experimenting with what's out there in terms of virtual platforms that students can learn from. And what I've heard over and over from parents is that it's not enough, and those online platforms alone can't really serve as your sole curriculum. And so that's where we would supplement with what our teachers, or we actually refer to them as our guides in our school, where they would come in to help apply or give opportunities for students to apply concepts that they are gaining some familiarity with online on these platforms, and then taking those into a real world application of the skills. So an example I'll give is our high school students, rather than learning about concepts of physics or Newton's laws, they would perhaps do some online research and work through that content on an online platform, but then we would come in and say, how are we going to apply this? Can we create and build a machine that proves these theories? How are we going to demonstrate mastery of this and demonstrate that we understand that this theory is true and proven? And so there's a lot of supplementing that goes along with those online platforms. But at the end of the day, they are meeting every standard that a traditional public school student would be meeting as well. They move through them at a different pace, but they're hitting those same standards.
And I guess for our parents that are watching, the number one question that comes to mind, especially when we talk about micro schools and maybe their difference as it relates to traditional schooling, are your students required to take the LEAP test? Is that a requirement?
Yeah, so they are not required to take the LEAP. We are currently an independent non-public school. We are in the process of becoming approved by the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education. And so we do not have to take the LEAP. However, we do give a normed standardized assessment at the beginning and end of each school year, so that we have a measure of where our students sit in terms of nationally, how do they compare with students of a similar age. And so we use the Iowa assessment, which is, we actually finished just this week with our start of year assessment, and we'll do that again at the end of the year. And that serves as kind of our supplement for some normed test that gives us an idea of where they are. But the real measure of learning, I think, is in that student portfolio and the body of work they create throughout the year.
And do your students get a diploma?
They do, yeah. We are accredited through Acton Academy, and so we're able to issue diplomas through that accreditation. We also are, as I stated, in the process of becoming board approved, so that we can also issue diplomas through the state of Louisiana. Acton Academy, for those who are not familiar, is based in Texas, and there are, I want to say, 94 schools internationally now that have popped up of that same methodology, and they have graduates that are at all sorts of colleges. They have graduates that are at Stanford, Yale, Georgia Tech. I know I was speaking about a student just last night who's at Georgia Tech now, graduated from an Acton school. So yes, we are able to issue diplomas, and they're comparable to what you would receive from a Louisiana public school.
And how long has NOLA Micro School been in existence?
This is our 6th year of operation.
So that's great to know. And parents, my parents that are watching, I would encourage you to ask questions. We have 3 of the greatest minds, educational minds here. And so please feel free to submit questions so that we can get them answered. Dr. Brumley, I'll pan over to you. Of course, we know that COVID highlighted both the benefits and the deficiencies relative to traditional education. And it underscored the fact that not only were traditional schooling provided education to students, but for many, it was a safe place for them to be. Some school provided the only meal that a child was guaranteed to have. And it also serves as a socialization outlet. Knowing these needs and understanding that there are some things that we have to continue to work on, you seem very open to really doing what is best for children and parents. But does having more educational options for children more of a priority now that we see some of these highlighted things?
Yeah, I think that this will, even though it happened, I mean, I could use the word organically because of a pandemic. It has happened. And I think that many parents will recognize the power that they have in choice. And we need to do our part to make sure that they are able to exercise that power to all extents that are reasonable and possible. And so we want to be a part of that so long as we can ensure safe environments for kids where they are getting the education that they deserve. Look, one of the things I think that we also have to, have conversation around is just the word access. And I think about access in 2 specific ways with this right now. And one is to making sure that, or trying to find ways to ensure that all students, regardless of their family's income, would have access to an opportunity like this, if in fact it is an opportunity that they would like to have. All of us have seen or may know friends and family members who, because of the pandemic, grouped together with other dads and moms and said, hey, we're going to work together. And, you have the kids on Monday and Tuesday, and we'll have them Wednesday and Thursday, and we'll do remote learning together, and we'll have childcare. But we have to make sure that whenever we think through that, that we are ensuring that kids of every income level have opportunities in something like a micro school, if that is a road that we choose to travel. And the other thing that I want to just raise which is also an access issue, is, we don't have broadband or high-speed internet access across the entire state. And especially in our rural areas, this is more of a challenge. And so as we think through micro schools, I just wonder, might this be an approach that systems even could utilize and incorporate into their own portfolio, where students may be out of range of accessible internet activity, and they could set up these opportunities for micro schools within their geographical community that is often sparse and not necessarily close to the actual school building.
And you must have read my mind, because my next question was going to be, what do you think the number one challenges are as we move into trying to be more flexible? And of course, we know definitely having access to internet is definitely one of those things, and to make sure that there's equity for everyone, not just based on income or location, but that we are providing opportunities that everybody has access to. But if there are any more that you want to throw in, Dr. Brumley, feel free.
Well, the issue is critically important around access to high quality internet. We have students around the state right now that are, what is the word, #logged out. They cannot receive the interactive instruction that they need, because even if a device is supplied to the child doesn't necessarily have access from their home. And so that's a real problem. And that digital divide is creating further complications in our rural communities that have struggled over the last few years anyway. And so I just think that as policymakers, or I think rather as an agency, I have a responsibility to make sure and know, or to try and determine, how many kids have access to a mobile device. And of those kids, how many of them can go home and access the internet? Either they may have it and they can't afford it, or they don't have the opportunity at all. And so with that information, then being able to provide that information to policymakers so that they can help close the divide, which they absolutely have to do.
And we have a question on the screen that says from Southerngirl225 Louisiana. Her question is, if she were interested in opening a site, a micro school site, what steps would she need to take? And maybe Ashley, you can weigh in on that.
Yeah, so I don't know if I'll have a super specific detail on this, but I know the route that we took was through, as I mentioned, Acton Academy, and they have a process that you would go through in terms of contacting them first and just stating an initial interest. And then they have a whole a series of trainings that set you up to be successful in opening your site and making sure that you've got everything in order. So that's the route we took. I don't know if Dr. Brumley knows more about outside of an Acton Academy, what you might do to open a site.
Yeah, and this is a place where we really do not have, regulations and rules and governance around. But I think it is a place where those processes will begin to be developed, most likely.
And we have another question from Southerngirl225 Louisiana. I'm asking, would child care, aftercare payments through the state be available for income eligible families for children in a high school age range? And so I don't know if this question is specific to micro schools or if this is just in general, would child care after payments be an eligible expense?
So I'm a little bit struggling with understanding the exact question, but I would direct the audience member to louisianabelieves.com, where she can find contact information and make a connection with our department, and we'll be happy to reach back out to her.
Thank you. So I know Kelli has been sitting in that corner, just quietly waiting. And I know I have the honor and privilege to work very closely with Ms. Bottger, who is extremely committed to making sure that every family has access to quality education. And I know as we travel the highways and byways, we hear a lot of stuff that kind of prevents parents from having diverse educational opportunities. And one of the major questions that always come up, and it's a question that I'm going to ask Kelli specifically to speak to, is do these new and innovative concepts, the concepts of micro schools and micro pods and learning pods, do they work to dismantle the public school system, or does this give parents more options to educate children?
Thanks, Tiffany. So that's been the age-old question. And my response is, to date, can you tell me one public school that is closed as a result of school choice in Louisiana? And so far, I've gotten blank stares and no response. So my answer is, it depends on what you're looking at. Dollars aren't actually taken away from the public school system, and they aren't dismantled. If dollars are removed from the public school system for school choice, it's simply the state appropriation of the funds through our MFP, which is our state funding formula. All local revenue that is paid through the taxation of the citizens in that parish remains with the district. And a lot of our school choice initiatives, including our tax donation program, it actually saves the state money because it's capped at 80 and 90% of the MFP through K-8 through 9th through 12th grade. And so we're actually saving the state money. In Ashley's case with her micro school, that has nothing to do with public education. It's private dollars that pay for that micro school. It would be the same thing as a parent selecting to pay their taxes to the public school system through the millage and then turning around and sending their child to a private school. So my tax dollars in general would stay, if I was that parent selecting that option, with the local school district while I paid out of pocket for the private school. When it comes to talking about other like pandemics and learning pods, so far across the nation, we have seen the federal dollars that came down for educational purposes go to those learning situations and school choice methods, if you will, we have not seen any funds come directly from the public school system. That actually, our public school funds, for people who don't understand the process, our State Board of Elementary and Secondary Education, they actually come up with a funding formula for the school. They send it over to our state legislature, who votes it up or down. And then it moves through the process. Even if they vote it down, it reverts to the previous year's funding formula. So school dollars aren't lost. To date, all school choice programs that have been enacted in the state have gone through a line item appropriation outside of the public dollar fund, or it has gone through tax credits that individual donors receive against their state owed taxes. And so to me, while I do envision a day in which school choice comes through, let's say, an education savings account in the future, I'm sure lots of people have heard the dollars follow the child. At that point, we'll have some conversations about dollars leaving the public school system. But as of right now, there is no threat. There hasn't been a threat. Every study we've ever seen where we've removed kids in school choice programs, the public school systems have actually had higher grades as a result of us removing some of the most at-risk kids and putting them in private schools. So the easy answer is no, not today. I'm sure we need to find pathways for the parents to have a la carte menu options, if you will, for education. You will see different things happen with funding, but right now the public school funding is constitutionally protected. And there's not going to be like a run out of public schools to private schools. We just don't have the capacity either. So if you talk about parents picking up, it's still not going to happen. I mean, you've seen a lot of people do interchange the micro schools and the learning pods, but you have seen more and more learning pods pop up where parents, as Dr. Brumley talked about, put 6 to 12 kids in a class on computers, and they hire someone, a coach or facilitator or retired teacher, to kind of oversee the learning, because parents obviously have to go back to work. But that's private paid by the parents, so that's still not taking away the dollars from the public school system. That's actually probably 9 times out of 10 in these learning pod cases, educating the kids fully online.
Thank you so much, Kelli, for that detailed explanation. And that should assuage a lot of concerns, a lot of misinformation as well. We have a question from Ms. Denisha Merriweather, who wants to know, so on paper, she's asking about the classification of NOLA micro schools. Is it on paper, would it be classified as a private school?
And I'm just reading the second part of this question. If we're registered as a tutoring service with the state or a curriculum provider. On paper, we would be more considered a private school. We're an independent, non-public school. And I think questions, especially listening to this conversation about access, come up when I hear private school and thoughts around that. And something that is really important and has been important since the formulation of this school 6 years ago is to make it a community that is reflective of the city of New Orleans. And so while we are tuition based, our tuition is really, it's on a sliding scale. We have a base tuition, and depending on a family's ability to pay that or pay above that in some cases, that's what they pay. And we do have a third-party partner who helps us kind of assess what is a family's estimated contribution for a school year. And we do everything we can to accommodate that because I think it's really important. That's something I am very passionate about, is ensuring that if a family and a student is choosing something that is more non-traditional and just feels that a traditional school environment is not the right fit for their learning style or their needs, that they have access to something like this, regardless of their financial situation. And so, yes, to answer your question, yes, we are private on paper. Yes, and we like to be accessible to any family that chooses this sort of educational experience. Oh, and I'm seeing another question here. Are micro schools only for affluent families? Which I feel like I kind of spoke to that just now. I can't speak for other micro schools besides NOLA Micro, but I definitely would not say that is our demographic. Our demographic of students is families who have chosen something different. And I would say we have a wide variety of socioeconomic backgrounds with our families. And there's a lot of accommodating that goes into that in terms of what families are able to pay.
Thank you, Ashley. New face in the webinar. I'm Paul Doff, and I'm the Deputy State Director for American Federation for Children here in Louisiana. Tiffany is having Wi-Fi issues, so I'm going to throw out a question. We're talking about equity, access, that type of thing. This pandemic is going to be with us for a while. Are there any new funding mechanisms that can help parents be more nimble? And I'm looking down the line in the pipeline, and I'll let anybody answer that.
So, I think that's the age-old question, is how, when you have the MFP sent to public schools, and when you have a pandemic where the public schools are doing everything they can online, but it's hard for the teacher who's in a hybrid model to teach the students in class, as well as essentially be tech support to the students that are at home online learning, as well as balancing with the duties and responsibilities of parents, especially in single income homes where they have to work. I think we're going to have to come up with a different strategy for how do we help these parents. And so one of the things we've been thinking about over the last few days since the special session was called is trying to help those parents that created those learning pods or micro schools, however you want to define them. I define them as learning pods, and put the students together, or took their kids, and because they weren't successful in the online learning environment, put them in a non-public school for face-to-face teaching and instruction. We're looking at bringing some legislation that deals with a tax credit for those parents. So it would be retroactive essentially from the day our schools were shut down, which is March 13th, through 2 weeks after we entered into phase 3, which would be September 25th, allowing those parents to actually get a tax credit on their Louisiana state income taxes to offset the expenses for if they had to buy uniforms for a non-public school, if they had to pay tuition, if they hired a coach or facilitator to sit with their child or group of children to facilitate that online learning. Anything, transportation, those expenses that were incurred, because there is no funding model for this, we at least want to try and pass some legislation in the next few weeks to offset those parents' expenses. Because we know if you were currently enrolled in public school, you probably weren't planning on sending your kids to a private school, so that's an extra expense. If you had to go back to work, you weren't thinking about having your public school student then have to have a learning coach or facilitator while you were at work to help your child succeed in school. And so that's the best that we have at the moment. Obviously, we'll continue to work through that. I know Dr. Brumley has told me if there's more federal dollars that come in, we maybe can try and figure it out. Other states have done the same. But our greatest need at the time when we first got federal dollars, as we talked about, the access to high quality education and online, whether I know broadband is always going to be an issue, but the other issue we had was one-to-one devices. So our kids didn't have computers, half of them, and the school districts weren't prepared to send them home. I know they created assembly lines after kids got sent home, but most systems still didn't have enough laptops for every kid. And you can't assume that every child, especially this goes right to the equity issue, that's low income, is going to have a computer at their disposal. And a lot of times, mom and dad need those computers because we were all sitting at home. And so just those challenges, I think our dollars were spent correctly the first go round with one-to-one devices. I wish we'd have gotten more money from the feds, but looking for potential future money, fingers crossed. I do think that we should really look at facilitating learning pods, et cetera, especially for these people trying to get back to work, but the kids remain online and need some kind of coach or facilitator, because I keep hearing flu season is going to make COVID-19 much worse. And so I feel like there's a potential later in the school year to be kind of back where we were between March and April, and I just want to be as prepared as possible. But the funding is very difficult in this current situation.
And before I turn it back over to Tiffany, who's overcome her internet connectivity issues, which we're always worried about. Yeah, worried about that physical access. Dr. Brumley, what kind of federal funding have you seen flow from the federal government, I guess, through the state into Department of Ed since COVID-19 started, and what do you anticipate in the near future?
Yeah, but before that, I think what we just experienced with Tiffany is a prime example of what we're experiencing in our school systems. You know, putting together this call, I have no doubt with the quality of people and the quality of organization that that we were as prepared as we possibly could have been for this particular webinar, but yet we lost Tiffany a few times. And so, you know, I think we have to recognize that even those of us who have the ability to pull this off, there are still complications. And that's what's being experienced throughout our state and nation as a whole. So, Paul, to your question, though, we have pushed out about $316 million to school systems to try and help overcome the issues associated with COVID-19 of federal dollars. The majority of those funds have been utilized, as Kelli indicated, for mobile devices. In many instances across the state, actually providing funds to enable a family to have internet within their home. You know, for instance, I think over the last 2 to 3 months, we've as a state connected about 60,000, somewhere between 50 and 100,000 additional students to the internet, which is a good thing, but it's expensive and it's not sustainable for us to be able to continue to do with current funding models and ways of doing that. So that money's been pushed out. It's been used for mobile devices, connectivity, PPE, online learning platforms, professional development, sanitation chemicals, just a host of different uses for that equipment. But we all do have our eye on this next round of potential funding coming out of Washington, D.C. And hopefully it will, if it comes, it will be funding that gives us some additional flexibility to do some of the things that we were unable to do in round one.
Tiffany, I'm turning the show back to you.
And I guess, hi guys, so glad to be back. Is there anything that we can do and education leaders can do to assist parents? We understand the challenges. We understand the digital divide. We understand that even if you're supposed to have internet, you don't always get it. But what are some of the other things that we can do to assist parents with expenses relative to distance learning? And that's for anybody who wants to answer.
I mean, I just don't think there's a ton besides trying to pass legislation to offer them a tax credit. There's not a lot right now until we get those federal dollars in, if we get them. Just because our state, obviously, our three main sources of resources for our state budget have been strangled due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And so it's going to be difficult. I think it's the age-old cuts to healthcare and higher ed that's coming in the next budget. And so unfortunately, unless we offer some kind of tax credit to offset the expenses these parents have incurred, there's not a lot that we can do for them. We're essentially waiting on the federal government to give us some aid because it's going to be quite a long economic recovery until our state budget can stand on its own more easily without budget cuts that we all know are coming, unfortunately. So I think it's just difficult. And I think it's difficult because you don't see, like, I feel as friends with nonprofits have said their fundraising has even dried up. So like before, I used to put on my big girl shoes and go hit the streets and fundraise. But even the donors have taken large hits. And so they're not as generous as they previously was because of our economic situation. And so I think we're going to have to be as inventive as we possibly can to try and assist these parents.
Well, I want to thank all of you for taking time. I know all of you are very, very busy and have a lot of stuff going on. And we just want to thank you for taking time to come and talk to our parents and our educators and school leaders and legislators that are on the line listening to this. And before we close it out, I guess we'll go around if there are any last statements or last remarks that any of you have, we would certainly want to hear them. And so I start with Dr. Brumley.
Oh, thank you, Tiffany. First of all, thanks for including me on the call. Look forward to continued conversation around this particular issue. Interesting conversation, more broad scale around the ability to empower parents' choice and educational innovation around flexibility of models. Beyond that, just would like to take the opportunity to encourage everyone to extend as much grace and patience and flexibility as possible with all of our teachers and our leaders, whether that's a teacher in the classroom that's teaching kids face-to-face, a leader in that building, a teacher that is teaching remotely through distance learning, or if it's a parent as teacher. Let's just be as graceful as we possibly can with each other and apply flexibilities and patience. And, you know, I'm a glass half full kind of person. And I think we're going to come through this and we will come through this better, hopefully, if we stick together as much as possible.
Definitely. Ms. Red?
Yeah, I would just echo what Dr. Brumley said. First, thank you so much for including me in this discussion as well. It's an honor to speak with all of you. But I would share the sentiment that extending that grace and patience right now is key. And for parents who are watching this, if you are finding that you are frustrated, as many parents are right now, and feeling like you need a resource, we are out there. NOLA Micro Schools is still accepting students for this year. And as I mentioned earlier, access is something that is really important to us. So regardless of your situation that you might find yourself in, please reach out, because there's always a conversation that we can have. If you feel this is, you know, a right choice for you and something you're interested in pursuing that would be a good fit for your child, please reach out. Our website is nolamicroschools.org, and I'm happy to connect with anyone who'd like to talk further about that.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Bottger, could you please close us out?
I will. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful for the future because the people of Louisiana are resilient. Out of every single natural disaster, our kids have come out with higher academic outcomes. And so I foresee that this pandemic, while it wasn't ideal, we're still going to come out stronger and have higher academics than we've ever had before. Like, I just believe our kids, our parents, our educators, our school leaders, our district leaders, our school boards are going to absolutely rise to the occasion. I think we had a long learning experience, and I think because of that, we now know how to educate kids with fidelity online. And I also think it's going to change not only the choice options that are offered to parents and give parents more learning experiences, more opportunities for their kids, but I also think the next time we have a major hurricane or a major natural disaster, we're better prepared to educate children at home. And so I only see great things to come for the state and for our students and our citizens. And I really do think we're going to rise to the occasion, and our academic outcomes are going to be higher than ever before because we've learned some valuable lessons. And we haven't failed. We've kept moving forward, and progress is just right around the corner, in my opinion.
Again, thank you all very, very much. And we look forward to continuing these types of conversations as we work very hard to provide the best educational options for families. So thank you and have a great week.